Hello and welcome to another edition of the Consumer Quarter. I'm Simon Palin. On the show today, raising the stakes in the fight against obesity, calls for a tax on fatty foods and even soft drinks.
They're completely empty calories. There's no nutrition that comes with all the calories.
Also on the program, some ways to avoid ATM fees. But first, they say 50% of restaurants go out of business in their first year. Well, perhaps that explains the rise in restaurants designed to last only a few weeks. The latest pop-up restaurant in Sydney opened and closed its doors within 3 days. It served food from Sudan and Burma and sought to give refugees from those countries a chance to shine. It wasn't everyone's idea of a relaxing meal. Elbow room was at a premium and there was plenty of noise. But the Drummer Restaurant's founder says it wasn't there for a long time, it was there for a fun time.
I also wanted to bring something to the community that had never been done before and bring something unique and exciting.
Sydney's latest pop-up restaurant was around for just 3 days. It served traditional food from Burma and Sudan, and it was cooked and served by refugees from those countries.
We learn how to carry 3 plates, and then we learn how to communicate with customers and smile.
I can have a chance of more education.
The project had the backing of Australian actress Miranda Otto.
I thought it was such a beautiful idea because it's not only helping train refugees and helping them, find work in the hospitality industry, but also helping to get across their culture, helping people in Australia to understand more about all the different people who live in this country.
Overseas, pop-up dining has been around for a decade or more, but here it's relatively new. An overwhelming theme is environmental awareness. Many pop-up restaurants use only biodegradable crockery and even menus. The Greenhouse pop-up cafe was built on Sydney Harbour earlier this year.
If you order rolled oats in this restaurant, we'll roll them at the table for you. So you'll see the oats, and if you want to know where they come from, we can tell you the farmer that grew them. And I think that that's the way it should be.
And it seems many consumers are more than happy to ease their social consciences by eating food and drinking wine. Well, on the last edition of the Consumer Quarter, we looked at calls for a tax on foods high in saturated fat. Well, now Denmark has become the first country in the world to apply a fat tax. Butter, milk, cheese, meat, oil and processed food with more than 2.3% saturated fat will all be taxed. It's put the price of a pack of butter up by 50 cents. The fat tax is designed to limit obesity and heart disease, but many Danes are cynical about its impact.
So the purpose is good, but I don't think this is the solution. There's a ton of other ways they could change the habits in the population.
Less than 10% of Danes are considered obese. That's half Australia's rate. And there's also growing calls for a tax on soft drinks to fight obesity. A US-based food policy expert used an annual psychologist conference in Canberra to spruik his proposal, which would see a 20% increase on all sugary beverages. Here's Jessica Nan.
Soft drink, soda, fizzy drink or pop. Whatever the name, they have one thing in common.
They're completely empty calories. There's no nutrition that comes with all the calories.
Professor Kelly Brownell is an expert in food policy and obesity at Yale University. He says waistlines are growing in line with a worldwide obsession with sugary drinks.
The research linking soft drink consumption to risk for obesity and diabetes is stronger than it is for any other category of food, even fast food.
He wants US and Australian governments to get tougher on obesity and says a 20% price hike on soft drink is a good place to start.
The economic estimates are that a tax in about the range of a penny per every ounce of sugared beverage would have a significant impact on consumption of those beverages and therefore improve health and lower healthcare costs.
Australian experts have applauded his proposal.
They're the kinds of strategies that occur at a population level, and we need population level strategies if we're going to overcome population level problems.
But some psychologists warn the causes of obesity are complex, often sitting parallel to eating disorders and body image concern.
It's a real dilemma because children are getting bigger and the overweight issue is becoming more prevalent, but at the same time, children are also more concerned about their body image and dissatisfied.
The food and grocery industry questions the relevance of the US-based research.
In Australia, the amount of sugar that Australians have consumed has decreased by 20% since the 1970s, at a time when obesity has doubled.
Professor Brownell will spend the next few weeks travelling the country to spread his idea.
Meanwhile, the consumer group Choice is urging people to name and shame food products that carry dodgy nutritional labels. The consumer watchdog says products that are marketed as healthy may be hiding their fat, sugar or salt content.
These labels are being used selectively to cover up the full picture as to a product's overall healthiness.
Consumers are being asked to send in pictures of dodgy labels, which will then be posted on an online wall of shame. And no doubt those focused on healthy eating are glad that bananas are looking ripe for a comeback. The cost of the fruit is set to come down after the recent Queensland cyclones, which cut supply, pushing prices up by as much as $10 a kilo. Growers say the banana market should return to normal in a week or two. Well, as we know, the traditional retail sector is hurting, but Australians are flocking to online retailers, spending $22 billion this year alone. And while big players like Westfield are trying to get in on the online action, experts are warning that unless more come on board, Australia will continue to bleed money as more and more sales are done offshore.
$1 billion complex isn't enough. Even the glitziest malls can't afford to lose internet-savvy shoppers, so Westfield's giving consumers the choice of buying in-store or online.
So 50, 60, 70% or more of shoppers are actually researching online before they go into store and purchase. We really believe there's a symbiotic nature between the physical and the digital, and that both will be in the future, not one or the other.
This year, Australians will spend about $22 billion online. That figure's tipped to skyrocket by 2015.
Some retailers within that have got extraordinary stories. You talk to Aussie Farmers Direct, they talk about growing 400% in 3 years. But the overall story of about 11% is still very significant, I would argue, especially in an environment in which high street retail is stagnating for many retailers.
Some are ditching bricks and mortar altogether. This company's 11 times bigger than it was less than 3 years ago.
At this particular point in time, we see ourselves as complementary, but if you see the evolution of other channels, publishing, travel, hard goods like fashion and accessories is going in the same direction.
Martin Newman was the man behind the online offerings of big brands including Harrods, Ted Baker, Burberry and Speedo. He says Australia's missing out as British retailers launch a local internet assault.
So you've got the likes of ASOS who are now shipping more than £1 million of fashion goods to Australian retailers every single week. That's £52 million of sales they're taking away, potentially, that would be going to local market retailers.
Martin Newman says Australia needs to stop thinking local and beat the competitors at their own game by targeting markets in the UK. The internet's removed the tyranny of distance, and for those at this retail and e-commerce expo, the message is simple: adapt or perish.
That's Nicole Cheddle there, and a new survey shows local retailers are expecting a tough Christmas this year, but there are some things which consumers appear happy to spend money on. One of them is weddings. Research from Ibis World shows Australian couples are forking out an average of more than $36,000 to get hitched, and that's an increase of 6.5% on last year. And the other is pets. We're spending more than ever on vet services and accessories for our feathered and furry friends. The average household spends $1,400 a year keeping their pet happy and healthy. Now, I want to withdraw some money from my Westpac ATM card, but the closest Westpac teller machine is a few minutes drive away. I could use the other bank's ATM just over the road, but that would incur a $2 charge. Well, research shows 40% of cash withdrawals in Australia are made on foreign ATMs. Now that means Australians are wasting more than $630 million a year in fees. For more on this, I spoke to Damien Smith. He's from the financial product comparison website Rate City, and I started out by asking him how ATM users can avoid the fees.
Well, the number one way in which you can avoid paying an ATM fee, and that fee is typically about $2 per transaction, is by using an ATM within your own network, either from your own bank or financial institution or from one that they're affiliated with. So if you go to your bank's website or your financial institution's website, you'll see locations not only of their own ATMs, but most of them are part of some network or another that will allow you fee-free access. So start with that. The second advice is use cash out EFTPOS from supermarkets. You can generally get fee-free cash out at most major supermarkets, so when you're doing your shopping, take that little bit extra of cash. The third option is to do some budgeting and actually take out a little bit more cash than you might need. That's always a worry for people carrying around a little more cash. So the first two options, which is use one inside your network and use cash out EFTPOS where you can, are probably better approaches for most people.
And Coles and Woolworths have really latched onto this idea of promoting themselves as a place where customers can make EFTPOS withdrawals without incurring any fees.
We think that Coles and Woolies have definitely increased the amount of EFTPOS that's going through their networks, and a lot more people we think are doing cash out. We haven't got direct evidence on how much is going out through Coles and Woolies, but we do know that fewer people are using ATMs outside their own networks than they were. So there's some evidence to suggest that people are taking advantage of fee-free cash out EFTPOS from the major supermarkets.
And 2 years ago, there were new regulations introduced to ensure that banks had to display the charges on ATM screens as people withdrew money. Has that changed behaviours at all?
2 years ago, around half of the ATM transactions in Australia were done outside of one's own network, what we call foreign ATMs. That figure's dropped to 40% over 2 years, and it's still dropping.
And do you think banks and other institutions are under much pressure now to actually abolish these fees?
It's pretty hard to imagine that the real cost of managing an ATM transaction from outside your network is $2. There's certainly a lot of profit to be had there. But remember, a lot of these ATMs aren't owned by banks. There are companies out there that own stacks and stacks of ATMs. Many of the independent ATMs you'll see in supermarkets or shops or pubs aren't owned by the major banks, and they often charge a lot more than $2. So the banks need to look at it, but it's also some of these non-bank ATM owners that are charging these fees.
Okay, Damien Smith, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And still on ATMs, the first gold ATM has begun operating in Beijing. The ATM can provide customers with different sizes of gold bars, but don't expect these ones to be on every street corner. The exclusive ATMs will only be installed in high-end venues such as banks, five-star hotels and private clubs. And that's all for this edition of the Consumer Quarter. Thanks for joining us. If you've got any story ideas or just an interesting consumer insight, please get in touch on Facebook, search for the Consumer Quarter page and click like if you want to be kept up to date. And I'll see you next time.